Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me from where you're watching? Thanks. It was a chilly Saturday morning when I got the call. My daughter-in-law, Sarah, was packing her bags for a family trip, one I wasn't invited to. I had always prided myself on being the supportive mother-in-law, always there for my son David and his wife, but this time was different. This time the space they had carved out for me in their lives had shrunk down to nothing. Sarah called me early that day, the phone line buzzing in my ear. "Hey, just wanted to let you know we're heading to the mountains for the weekend. We've got everything sorted," she said cheerfully, almost too cheerfully. She didn't ask if I wanted to come. She didn't even hint that I might be included. No, this trip was just for them, and she made sure I knew that. "Okay, well, I hope you all have a good time," I said, keeping my tone light. My voice sounded fine, but something inside me twisted. I spent the rest of the day pretending it didn't bother me, but every time I glanced at the empty guest room with its unused linens and dust-covered picture frames, the ache grew. It wasn't just about the trip. It wasn't even about me being left behind. It was about the realization that my role in their lives had changed. Where once I had been a fixture in their home, a helping hand, a supportive presence, I now seemed like an afterthought. I made lunch that day, but I wasn't hungry. My mind kept replaying the words Sarah had said. "We've got everything sorted." It was so casual, so simple, like she couldn't have been bothered to extend the invitation. And maybe she couldn't. Maybe she didn't see any need to. That evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I wasn't just excluded from their trip. I had been excluded from their lives. I felt invisible, like a shadow lingering in the background while everyone else moved forward. And then it hit me. If they didn't have space for me, I would create my own space. I wouldn't just sit idly by while they carried on with their lives. No, I was done with being the forgotten one. I needed to make a stand to show them that I wasn't just some figure they could push aside when it was convenient. But I didn't act immediately. No, I needed to think about it, plan it out carefully. I wasn't going to make any rash decisions, but when the next phone call came through, Sarah asking me to check on the dog while they were away, it took everything in me not to snap. Instead, I simply said, "Sure, I'll watch the dog." But in the back of my mind, I knew something had changed. Something deep inside me shifted. The next morning, I went about my routine, trying to keep busy. I cleaned, I cooked, and I kept my mind occupied with small tasks around the house. But everything felt empty without them. It wasn't just the absence of Sarah and David. It was the absence of the recognition I once had in their lives. I was no longer a part of their plans, not even for a family trip. Around midday, I got a message from Sarah. It was a simple text, one I had grown all too familiar with. "Can you keep an eye on Coco? She needs feeding and a walk. Thanks." I read the message twice before responding with a KT. "Sure, no problem." But something inside me stirred. I had always taken care of Coco, even when I wasn't needed to, but now this was the only thing they seemed to remember about me. My ability to watch the dog while they lived their lives. They didn't even think to ask if I wanted to join them. It was as if my entire worth in their world had been reduced to just that dog sitter. I walked to the dog's bed, running my fingers through Coco's soft fur as she stared up at me, her big brown eyes trusting and loyal. If only she could speak. I thought bitterly. She might understand how I felt, but maybe she wouldn't. She loved me unconditionally. I envied that. But this wasn't just about the dog. And it wasn't even about the trip. It was about respect. The fact that they didn't even consider me as part of their family anymore. Not at me. As the day wore on, I felt myself growing angrier, but I didn't let it show. I was going to be smart about this. By the time the evening rolled around and Sarah and David were in the mountains enjoying their getaway, I was left staring at my phone. I had checked my bank account earlier that morning, and something clicked in my mind. I wasn't the woman who spent her days waiting to be needed. Not anymore. I opened my banking app and froze the credit cards they were using, every single one of them. If they were going to leave me behind and treat me like I was invisible, then they were going to feel it. Let them fend for themselves without the luxury of using my money. The second I hit confirm, I felt a small rush of empowerment. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it felt significant. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was taking control, and I wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning. I sat back in my chair, looking at the phone in my hand. Maybe they would notice, maybe they wouldn't, but either way, I didn't care anymore. I wasn't just the dog sitter. I wasn't just the one who had been sidelined. I was someone who deserved respect, and I was going to make sure they remembered that. The next few days passed in a strange, uncomfortable silence. I carried on with my routine, watching Coco, cooking meals that no one was there to appreciate, and cleaning up after myself, as usual. But every now and then I found my mind wandering to the actions I'd taken. Freezing the credit cards hadn't been a knee-jerk reaction. It had been a conscious choice, a choice to remind them that I wasn't invisible. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed some invisible line. Was I being petty, or was I finally doing something I should have done a long time ago, standing up for myself? Then on the fourth day, it happened. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I glanced down to see a notification from Sarah. It was a text. "Why did you freeze the cards? We can't even get groceries for the trip without them. You know, this is making things hard on everyone." I stared at the message for a moment, taking in the words I wanted to lash out, tell her how it felt to be sidelined, to be left behind in favor of her perfect little family getaway. But I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath, set the phone down on the kitchen counter and walked outside. For a moment, I needed to clear my head. The cold air hit my face, and I wrapped my arms around myself, walking down the path to the garden. My fingers brushed the edges of the rose bush I had planted years ago. It was still there, growing slowly but steadily. Just like me, I realized I had spent so long waiting for a sign to do something for myself, always prioritizing everyone else's needs over my own. The truth was, Sarah wasn't the only one who was frustrated. I was angry, too angry at myself for allowing this to happen, angry at David for staying silent, and most of all, angry at the entire situation. It wasn't just about a trip anymore. It was about years of neglect, years of putting up with being treated as an afterthought. When I returned to the house, the message from Sarah still sat on the screen. I stared at it again, unsure of how to respond. Finally, I typed back, "Maybe it's time you all learned how to do things without relying on me." I hit send before I could think twice. It didn't take long for the phone to ring. I watched the caller ID, seeing David's name flash across the screen. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something inside me pushed me to answer. "Mom, why are you doing this?" David's voice was laced with frustration. "You're making a scene over nothing. Just a trip. Just a trip," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Do you realize how much I've done for you both? How many times I've been the one who stepped in when you needed me? But it's never enough, is it? You don't even notice me anymore." There was a long pause on the other end. Then David sighed. "Mom, we didn't mean to make you feel this way, but you can't just freeze everything and act like we owe you something. I don't need anything from you, David," I said, my voice steady now. "But maybe it's time for you to understand that I deserve something too. Respect, recognition. It's not too much to ask for." The line went silent again, and for a moment I felt an unfamiliar sense of clarity. This wasn't about the trip. It was about them finally seeing me for who I was. Not just a maid, not just a caretaker, but a person deserving of their respect. "Goodbye, David," I said quietly before hanging up. As I sat down at the kitchen table, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and uncertainty. The consequences of freezing their cards were already starting to unfold, and I had no idea how they would react. But I was done waiting to be noticed. I had drawn a line in the sand. Now it was time to see if they would cross it. The phone calls didn't stop coming. David tried to reach me multiple times that evening, but I ignored each one. I had made my point, and I wasn't going to be pushed into a corner again. But then the inevitable happened. A knock on the door the next afternoon jolted me from my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked cautiously to the door, peering through the peephole, only to see Sarah standing there, arms crossed, her expression a mixture of frustration and concern. I took a deep breath before opening the door. "I need to talk to you," she said, her tone colder than I had ever heard it. She didn't wait for an invitation, pushing past me into the living room. "What the hell is this about freezing the credit cards?" I closed the door behind her and followed her into the living room, where she stood, hands on her hips, her eyes narrowed. I could feel the tension between us like a physical force. "Sarah, I don't need this from you right now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She scoffed, the sound sharp and condescending. "No, I don't think you get it. Mom, you're making everyone uncomfortable. David's freaking out. We've got no way to pay for anything. And you're sitting here acting like you're some martyr." I bristled at her words. You think this is about money? This is about respect. This is about the fact that I've spent years serving you both without so much as a thank you. She flinched at my words, but quickly regained her composure. Oh, please, you're just upset that you weren't included. It's not like we planned this to hurt you. I stood my ground. Then why didn't you ask me to come? Why was I the last one to know about this trip? Why am I only good enough to watch the dog while you all go off and have fun? Sarah's eyes narrowed because we didn't think you want to come. You don't even go on trips. You're always too busy playing the victim to enjoy life. I let out a bitter laugh. I'm not playing the victim, Sarah. I'm simply tired of being invisible, tired of being treated like I don't matter. You think I want to be stuck in the background while everyone else gets to live their lives? Her expression faltered, and for a moment I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes, but it quickly disappeared, replaced with an icy stare. I don't have time for this, she said coldly. I don't know why you're making everything so complicated. We're family, and you need to stop making everything about you family. Is that what you call it? I said, my voice rising. I've been there for you all this time, and the moment you don't need me, I'm discarded like an old rag. Sarah took a step back, her face softening for just a moment. Look, I didn't mean for it to come to this, but maybe you should think about the bigger picture. We all have our lives to live. The words hit me harder than I expected. I stood there, my heart racing, trying to process everything she was saying. My mind raced back to the years I had spent pouring myself into their lives. All for nothing. I had been invisible, convenience, a utility. I finally spoke, my voice low but firm. If you really want to fix this, you need to understand something. Sarah, I'm not going to sit around being your emotional punching bag anymore. You need to realize that I'm not a maid or a dog sitter. I'm a person. She didn't answer, instead turning on her heel and heading for the door. But as she reached for the handle, she paused, her back still to me. Fine, if you're going to act like this, then I guess you don't need us either, she said, her voice tight with anger. I don't need you to need me, Sarah. I just need you to respect me. And with that she walked out, leaving me standing there, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. The confrontation had left me shaken, but something in me had shifted. I wasn't just some placeholder in their lives anymore. I had made my decision and there was no going back. The silence that followed Sarah's departure was deafening. For the first time in a long while, the house felt truly empty. I sank into the armchair by the window, watching the leaves rustle in the yard, my mind swirling. I'd said everything I needed to say, but the weight of it still sat heavy on my chest. Hours passed, and the familiar chime of my phone broke the stillness. It was a message from David, and I could already feel the frustration radiating from the words. Mom, you've gone too far. We need to talk about the cards. You're really pushing things to the edge here. This isn't like you. I stared at the text, the words cutting through me, but this time I didn't feel the instinct to reply immediately. Instead, I took a deep breath and set my phone down. I didn't need to explain myself to him, not anymore. The truth was, I had tried for years to keep everything together. I'd been the one to hold the family in place to fix everything when it fell apart. But now I realized it was time for me to stop fixing and start living for myself. If they couldn't see that, then maybe it was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. Just as I was about to put my phone on silent, another message popped up. This time it was from Sarah. Mom, please, David and I are really upset. We don't understand why you're doing this. Can't you just give us a break? This is too much. We just want peace. The plea was genuine. I could hear the desperation in her words, but I had reached my limit. Peace for whom? Was it peace for me, or was it just a request for me to fall back into the background and keep quiet again? I sat up straighter, my fingers hovering over the keys. I had to answer, but this time I wasn't going to sugarcoat anything. Peace, I typed, my fingers tapping decisively. You want peace? I've been silent for too long. Sarah, I've been the one who sacrifices everything for the sake of keeping the peace, but no more. I'm done letting you all walk all over me. I deserve more than that. You don't get to use me anymore. I paused, reading the message over again. It wasn't angry, but it was firm, and it was final. I hit send, my heart pounding in my chest. Within minutes, my phone rang. It was David again. I let it ring, then it buzzed again and again. The third call was from Sarah. I stared at the screen for a moment, then silenced the phone. I had expected the fallout, but now that it was happening, I was surprisingly calm. I wasn't worried anymore. I wasn't the one who had done something wrong here. They were. They were the ones who had forgotten who I was. And now they had to deal with the consequences. An hour later, the doorbell rang. I wasn't surprised when I saw David standing on the doorstep, his face drawn with frustration. His jaw was tight, and there was a fire in his eyes that I had never seen before. "Mom, we need to talk," he said before I could even open my mouth. His tone was sharp, but not as accusatory as before. I stepped aside, letting him in. He walked into the living room, running a hand through his hair. "Why are you doing this?" he asked again, but this time there was a different edge to his voice. It wasn't anger, it was confusion, hurt. "You've never been like this." I folded my arms, leaning against the back of the couch. "David, I've been like this for years. You just never noticed." He looked at me, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't expected: regret, maybe even guilt. "I don't know what happened," he admitted, his voice softening. "We've just been so wrapped up in everything. I never thought about how you might feel." "Well, I've been thinking about how I feel for a long time," I replied, my voice. "I've spent my whole life putting everyone else first, but not anymore." He looked down, his shoulders slumping slightly. "So what now? Are you just done with us?" "I'm not done with you, David," I said, my voice gentle now, "but I'm done being invisible. I'm done being the one who gets pushed aside. If you want a relationship with me, it's going to take more than just a sorry. I need respect. I need to feel like I matter." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at the floor, the weight of my words sinking in. Then, after a long pause, he finally looked up. "I don't know if I can change everything overnight," he said quietly, "but I'm willing to try." For the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen all at once, but it was a start. The days after David's visit passed slowly, each one marked by a subtle shift in the air. There were no more phone calls from Sarah, no more messages from David. It was as if they were waiting for me to make the next move to come, crawling back into the fold of their lives. But I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to let myself be drawn back into a pattern of silence and submission. I spent my time focusing on myself, on my own needs and desires. I took long walks in the mornings, something I hadn't done in years. I began reading books I had put aside for too long, and I even started cooking just for the joy of it, not because anyone expected me to. It felt good to rediscover myself, something I had lost somewhere along the way. But then something unexpected happened. One afternoon, as I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, the doorbell rang. I hadn't been expecting anyone, but I knew instinctively that it wasn't Sarah or David. They had made their feelings clear, and I had no intention of answering their calls. So I was taken aback when I opened the door to find Emily, David's aunt, standing there with a hesitant look on her face. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly, her eyes scanning the interior of the house as if she was unsure whether she was welcome. I hesitated for a moment. Emily wasn't like Sarah. She was kind, thoughtful, and always tried to keep the peace in the family. I had always liked her, but I wasn't sure what her visit meant. Was she here to guilt me into forgiving them, or was she here to criticize my actions? I stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. "What's going on, Emily?" She walked in, looking around the room like it was the first time she had seen it. I had spent the past few days organizing things, clearing out clutter, making the space feel more like mine. It felt like a subtle declaration of my newfound independence, and I wasn't sure how Emily would take it. "First, I want to say that I understand why you did what you did." She began, sitting down across from me at the kitchen table. "You've always been there for all of us, for David, for Sarah, but somewhere along the way, I think we all took you for granted, especially Sarah." My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't expected her to say that Emily was the last person I thought would speak out, but hearing her words filled me with a mix of relief and disbelief. It was the first time anyone in the family had acknowledged the pain I'd been silently carrying for years. "I didn't come here to make excuses for their behavior," Emily continued, her voice soft but firm. "I know Sarah can be difficult, but I want you to know that what happened wasn't your fault. It's just she's so focused on her own life, on her career, that she's lost sight of what really matters." I nodded, my fingers curling around the warm mug of tea in front of me. "I know she's been caught up in her own world, but it's more than that, Emily. It's the way they've treated me, like I don't exist unless they need something. Emily sighed, her gaze softening. I get it, and I'm sorry for what you've gone through. You shouldn't have to feel like this, but you're not alone. You're not invisible. The words hung in the air, and I let them sink in. For so long I had felt invisible to my own family. I had given everything and received nothing in return. But here was Emily, someone outside of the immediate family, offering a kind of validation I had longed for. It was unexpected, but it was exactly what I needed. I'm not saying everything's going to change overnight, Emily added, her voice tinged with sympathy, but I think you've taken the first step. You've shown them that you won't stand for being treated this way anymore. I exhaled slowly, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in a long while, I felt like someone understood. I just don't know where to go from here, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. You go forward, Emily said, her eyes meeting mine with a quiet strength. You live your life for you now. The rest, well, they figure it out. But you can't keep living for everyone else. You deserve more than that. Her words were like a balm to a wound I hadn't realized was still raw for so long. I had placed my own needs on the back burner, always putting others first. But Emily was right. It was time for me to stop waiting for validation from a family that couldn't see my worth. Thank you, Emily, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I needed to hear that. She smiled gently, placing a hand on mine. You're welcome, and if you ever need someone to talk to, you know where to find me. As she left, I stood by the door, watching her walk down the path. Something inside me felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time, I could see a future for myself beyond the role I had always played in their lives. Maybe it was time to step into that future, no matter how uncertain it felt. It had been a few days since Emily's visit, and something inside me had changed. Her words, though simple, had started to settle deep within me. I wasn't invisible, and I wasn't just a caretaker, a shadow in my own family. I was a person with desires, needs, and a life of my own. For so long, I had placed my family at the center of everything while I faded into the background, constantly putting others first. But now, for the first time, I was choosing myself. As I sat down at the kitchen table one evening, sipping my tea, I couldn't help but reflect on the strange turn of events, the confrontation with Sarah, David's soft apology, and then Emily's support. But even as I felt a flicker of hope, the gnawing doubt that had been with me for years crept in. Had I made a mistake? Just as I was beginning to second-guess my decisions, my phone buzzed a new message. I looked down to see that it was from David. I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether I was ready to face another round of family guilt. But curiosity got the best of me, and I opened it. Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I'm sorry for how I've treated you. We've all been selfish. Sarah's been caught up in her own world, but that's no excuse for leaving you behind. I know this is hard, but I want to make things right. Can we talk, please? I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't the apology I'd hoped for. It wasn't even close to what I needed to hear. But it was something. A crack in the wall they had built around me, and yet I felt no rush to forgive. I took a deep breath and typed back slowly. David, I'm glad you're thinking about this, but I can't just forget everything that's happened. You and Sarah need to realize that I've spent years being your emotional support, your helper, but it's never been enough. I'm not your maid, and I'm not your backup plan anymore. I paused, my fingers hovering over the screen. Felt good to be firm, to finally speak my truth. I added one more line, one that felt important. I need you to understand that I won't go back to what we had, not unless things change. I sent the message and sat back the words, feeling final. I wasn't angry, but I was resolute. I wasn't going to be dragged back into their world of neglect and one-sided relationships. The silence that followed the message was deafening. I thought I'd feel relief, but instead there was a sense of unease. Would they really change, or was I just fooling myself into thinking that they would? The following day there was a knock at the door. Again, I wasn't surprised. David had called earlier to say he was coming over, but this time I wasn't sure what to expect. My heart was racing as I opened the door to find him standing there holding a bouquet of flowers in his hands. His expression was sincere, but I could see the weariness in his eyes. Mom, I'm sorry for everything, he said quietly, his voice unsteady. We've been selfish, all of us. I don't expect you to forgive us right away, but I want you to know that I'm willing to make it right. I looked at him taking in the flowers. It was a gesture, but it felt hollow. I had been waiting for a real change, for something more than just words. He could apologize all he wanted, but actions spoke louder than anything. I appreciate the flowers, David, I said, my voice calm but firm, but it's going to take more than that. I can't just go back to being the person I was. I've changed, and I need you both to understand that this isn't just about a trip or a few hurt feelings. It's about respect. You need to show me that you value me, not just when it's convenient for you. His shoulders slumped, and I could see that he was frustrated, maybe even defeated. I know, Mom, I know, but I'm asking for a chance, a real chance, to show you that we can change. I studied him for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. He was trying, but was it too little, too late? I'll give you a chance, David, I said finally, but I need to see the effort. I need to see that this isn't just about me forgiving you. It's about us building a new relationship, one where I'm not just the one holding everything together. He nodded, his eyes bright with hope. Thank you, Mom. We can do this. I know we can. As I watched him leave, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with apprehension. It was a step forward, but it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of what was bound to be a long road. Could they truly change, or would they fall back into their old habits? Only time would tell, but for now I was prepared. I had drawn my line, and I wasn't going to let it be crossed again. The following weeks felt like a delicate balancing act. David kept his word. He called more often, checked in on me, and seemed genuinely interested in what was going on in my life. But Sarah, she still hadn't reached out. I didn't expect her to. Not right away. She had a tendency to avoid confrontation, to run from the things that made her uncomfortable. But it wasn't just her silence that bothered me. It was the realization that she didn't fully understand the depth of what had happened to her. I was still just the one who took care of things when it was convenient for her. I knew David was trying, but he couldn't be the one to fix everything. He had his own life to manage, and I couldn't ask him to carry the weight of the family's dysfunction on his shoulders. I needed more than words. I needed actions. I needed to see that they were willing to change the dynamics that had kept me in the background for so long. One evening, I received an unexpected call from Emily. Again, she was more hesitant this time, as if she wasn't sure whether she should be involved in family matters anymore. But when she spoke, it was clear she had something important to say. Amanda, I know things are tense, but I think it's time to have a family meeting. Just the four of us. David, Sarah, you and me, Emily said. Her voice was calm, but there was a definite urgency behind her words. I think it's time Sarah realizes what this has really cost you. I sat there for a moment, processing what she had said. A family meeting. It sounded like a good idea, but the thought of sitting in a room with Sarah again, knowing everything that had passed between us, filled me with a mix of anxiety and determination. I don't know if I'm ready for that yet, I admitted. I don't know if Sarah is ready to hear what I have to say. Emily was quiet for a moment. I get it, but I think it's time for her to realize that she can't just treat you like this anymore. You've been the backbone of that family. Amanda, they need to see that. Her words hit me harder than I expected. She was right. I had been the backbone, the quiet support, holding everything together while they took me for granted. And now it was time for me to stand up and say enough. The next week, Emily set up the meeting. It wasn't easy. Sarah was reluctant at first, but eventually she agreed. We all gathered at Emily's house one Sunday afternoon, and the tension in the room was thick. I had spent hours mentally preparing for this moment, but nothing could have prepared me for the rawness of it. We sat in the living room, the silence between us almost unbearable. David, as usual, was the one to break it. Mom, he began, his voice low. I know I've messed up. I know this isn't going to be easy, but I want to make it right. I want you to be a part of our lives again. I looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, but it wasn't just about him. It was about Sarah, and she was avoiding eye contact, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. She wasn't ready to confront what she had done. I took a deep breath and turned to Sarah. You've treated me like I didn't matter, like my feelings didn't count. I've been the one to pick up the pieces every time you needed me, but where were you when I needed you? She flinched at my words but didn't speak right away. I could see the defensiveness in her posture, the way she sat back in her chair, as if preparing for a fight. I didn't mean to hurt you, Sarah finally said, her voice quieter than usual. I guess I got caught up in everything. I didn't realize what I was doing. Caught up? I asked, the words coming out sharper than I intended. You've been so caught up in your own life, in your own world, that you've forgotten him in this family, too. I've been here for years supporting you both, but you've never made space for me. I've had enough." The room was silent for a long time after that. Emily was the next to speak, her voice calm but firm. "Sarah, I know you didn't mean to hurt Amanda, but you need to understand the impact this has had on her. You can't just act like everything is fine when it isn't. She deserves better than this." Sarah looked down at her hands, her face flushed with guilt. "I didn't know it was that bad, and that's the problem," I said, my voice steady. "You never stopped to think about how I was feeling. You've been so focused on yourself that you didn't see what I was going through, and I can't just let that slide anymore." It was the first time in years that I had spoken so plainly, so openly about my feelings, and as the words left my mouth, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't just speaking for myself, I was speaking for everyone who had been silenced for too long. Sarah's face softened, and for the first time, in what felt like forever, I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do better. Promise." The words were simple, but they were enough. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a step forward. We weren't going to fix everything overnight, but we had started to tear down the walls that had built up between us. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. The family meeting was a turning point. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and it certainly wasn't the end of our struggles, but it was a beginning. I could feel something shifting between us, something tentative, fragile, but real. For the first time in a long while, there was hope that things could be different over the next few weeks. The dynamic between Sarah, David and me began to slowly change. Sarah made more of an effort. She started calling me, checking in, and even invited me to dinner one night. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was a start. David, too, seemed more present, more aware of the space I occupied in their lives. He started making time for just the two of us, a reminder that we were still family, at least in some sense of the word. But the biggest change wasn't in them, it was in me. I realized that for years I had been waiting for them to see me, to recognize my worth. I had been so focused on trying to fix their problems that I lost sight of my own. But now I was reclaiming my life. I was learning to say no when I needed to prioritize myself over the constant demands of others. It wasn't always easy, but it was necessary. And then one evening, something unexpected happened. I received a message from Sarah. It wasn't an apology or a request for forgiveness. It was an invitation. "Mom," the text read, "I've been thinking. I know things haven't been easy between us, but I want you to come with us to the lake house this weekend. I want us to start over. Just the family. No expectations. Just us." I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling a mix of emotions. I hadn't expected this, but there it was, a genuine attempt at reconciliation. Sarah had made the first real step in trying to mend the relationship, and it was up to me whether or not to accept it. I took a deep breath, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I typed, "I'll come, but let's make this about all of us. Let's start fresh. No more ignoring the things that matter." I hit send and waited. The response came almost immediately. "I'm glad, Mom. This means a lot. We can do this together." That weekend, I found myself driving to the lake house, a place that once symbolized family togetherness. Before everything had fallen apart, I could feel the weight of the past on my shoulders, but I also felt a strange sense of peace. This wasn't going to be a quick fix, but it was a start. When I arrived, Sarah and David greeted me warmly. There was no awkwardness, no forced smiles, just genuine relief that we were all here in the same space, trying to heal. We spent the weekend together, cooking meals, playing board games and sitting by the fire talking like we hadn't in years. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. As I sat on the porch that Sunday evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something. This wasn't just about me forgiving them, it was about me forgiving myself. I had spent so long blaming myself for the distance between us, for the way things had turned out, but now I knew that healing didn't just mean reconciling with them. It meant letting go of the resentment and guilt I had carried for so long, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. As I drove home from the lake house, I didn't feel the weight of the past on my shoulders anymore. I felt lighter. I had learned something valuable over the past few months, that I could be a part of their lives without losing myself in the process. I could be loved, respected and cherished without being anyone's doormat. Life wasn't perfect, and our family wasn't perfect, but we were trying. And that, for me, was enough. Months passed and things between us slowly continued to improve. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There were moments of tension, moments when old habits threatened to creep back in. But every time we faced those challenges, we faced them together. And that, I realized, was what truly mattered. I found myself spending more time doing things for me, picking up old hobbies, taking trips I had always dreamed of, and learning how to set boundaries without feeling guilty. I had spent so many years focused on everyone else's happiness that I had neglected my own, but no longer. Now I knew that my happiness mattered just as much as anyone else's. And as for Sarah and David, we found a new rhythm. We had our ups and downs, but we were building something stronger, something based on mutual respect, understanding and love. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I had finally found my place, not as a caretaker, not as someone who was constantly overlooked, but as someone who was worthy of love, respect and happiness. And that, I realized, was the most important thing of all.